Lux Occult is part of the Green Mushroom Podcast Network.
Alpha, Echo, Alpha, Romeo, Omega, Nevada, India, Golf, Yankee, Sierra, Omega, Bravo, Quebec, Echo, Delta, Quebec, Echo, Delta, Alpha, Echo, Alpha, Romeo, Omega, Nevada, India, Golf, Yankee, Sierra, Omega, Bravo, Quebec, Echo, Delta, Quebec, Echo, Delta. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert, repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clear blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. That is Wild Geese by Mary Oliver. Hello and welcome to Lux Occult. This is the podcast where we gleefully taunt the mundane, butcher the Latin, and most other languages, and we also discuss a variety of occult and esoteric adjacent topics, exploring the intersections of magic, art, science, philosophy, technology, and so much more. It's occultism for everyone. I'm your host, Lux Estrada, and if you're hearing the sound of my voice, that means that magic and this show, for that matter, are for you, if you want them. There are a lot of different ways to be more free, and using magic or making space for spiritual practice in your life can be one of them. As always, I don't speak for anybody but myself. Others can, will, and should disagree sometimes. How will we ever learn anything if we all agreed all the time, after all? Unlike those who attempt to be reasonable should be willing to do, I reserve the right to change my opinion, and often do, based on new evidence. Alright, fuck yeah, very stoked to bring you today's episode. It's a juicy one, in which a lot of ground is covered. I spoke with Rocket, aka Andy I, on Instagram about Agdistis and the mythology surrounding them, the large madness and the small madness. Rocket shares some experiences and thoughts about working with this god form, as well as the Trans Day of Remembrance and about the upcoming Trans Rite of Ancestor Elevation. We talk Spinoza, the idea of a transcendent versus immanent divine, and what that translates into for humans. Are we divine or take part in divinity, or must the evil and base urges which define us be somehow constrained? What does this look like when religious philosophy is translated into political doctrine? We also talk about Kabbalah with a K and why the mysteries with a capital M must be experienced somatically rather than cognitively, and much, much more. There's also going to be a scrumptious poetry snack and related sound magic tracks from the newly released Green Mushroom Project and We the Hollow digital mixtape Fuck Around and Find Out Part 2, and much more good stuff. But before we get into it here, I'd like to say thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you taking the time to hang out with me and my very rad guest here today on this show. As I'm fond of saying, time really is one of the few zero-sum games that we play, so the fact that you choose to spend some of yours here with me is appreciated. Due to being introverted and for reasons having to do with mental health, honestly, I don't spend a whole lot of time engaging with social media. Not there every day or anything like that, but that certainly doesn't mean that I don't want to hear from you all. I'm beyond lucky to have such amazing listeners, collaborators, cohorts, and co-conspirators, etc. I'm always impressed with how cool and knowledgeable and everything you all are. Many thanks. I always welcome people's thoughts, questions, comments, suggestions, or arcane revelations. You can reach me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com, or you can hit me up on Instagram at luxoccultpod. If you like the show and the other stuff I've been getting into, you can support it on Patreon. If you do so, you can take a bibliomancy break with me. There are no tiers or levels or whatever, so give as you will. Buy Me a Coffee is an option for those who wish to show their support with a one-time donation and don't want to do the whole Patreon thing. Thank you so much to those of you who are already doing so. Your support makes the show possible by allowing me to cover the expenses associated with making it and thereby justifying the time I spend. I've recently incurred some new costs related to paying for recording stuff that Patreon money is very much appreciated, so thank you. And thank you so much to everybody who's been supporting the show by spreading the word about it. Also very much appreciated and very helpful. I really do love making this thing, so thank you all for making that possible. Alright, come on and sit down, relax, allow me to set the table for you with an introduction to my guest. Rocket is a Spinozian pantheist weirdo Jew, a time-traveling transsexual, and occultist and mage of the Agdistis order. Rocket's work explores the interplay between radical diasporism, gender antinomianism, sadomasochism, and ancestor veneration with an eye towards the triumph of the forces of faggotry over the state. Their work has appeared in the Queer Porn Film Festival, the Queer Magic Anthology, the Texas Journal of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, and the Brill Journal of Religion and the Arts. They can be found at the Trans Rite of Ancestor Elevation, which is trans-rite.tumblr.com, moderating the anarcho-surrealist Wizards Brigade on Discord, on Instagram at iandy, EYEANDY, or in person at the Reve, Transarchist International Community in New York State. Fuck yeah. So links to all that good stuff is of course going to be available in the show notes. So I asked, speaking into the void, for a conversation about Spinoza and machines and all that shit in a recent episode. I've been thinking about this stuff, well, I sort of think about it a lot, but the obsession had kind of reached a pretty frenzied peak around the time when I was doing some final work on my latest album of ritually produced oral erotica, Void Machine Adjustment. You can find a link to that in the show notes. And that was last month. Yeah, this idea of the void and the machine and what the machine means is something that think about it. But anyway, from the void I received a message from Rocket with a link to a paper they had written about Spinoza, which is mentioned in that biography above, about the concept of dokiet, which means here-ness, cut-ups, and so much more. The thing was sort of packed full of synchronicities for me in a way that made it magically hot to the touch. I had to learn more. So here we are. Quick note, Rocket's dog makes a guest appearance for some of the recordings, so don't be alarmed should you detect canine audio. It is all good. I'll be back later on to do updates and tell you a little bit more about the cool cut-up and gematria work that Keats Ross did to find the track order for Fuck Around and Find Out 2, the Green Mushroom Project, and We the Hollow digital mixtape. Many thanks to everybody who contributed audio for that, as well as to Eric J. Millar for producing the very dope artwork for the cover. He also contributed a track as well, so double thanks to you, Eric. I recorded a rad conversation with him the other day, which is on the docket for editing soon. There's some really great stuff in store for you all. Stoked to share all that. So Keats was, of course, my partner in crime in organizing stuff for the mixtape. Many thanks to him for all of his help. And speaking of the devil, shall of course cause the devil to appear. So leading us into my chat with Rocket, here is from Fuck Around and Find Out Part 2, the Green Mushroom Project, and We the Hollow digital mixtape, a track from Keats himself. This is an excerpt of Pro Spectre Ritual by Revel Ross. Cheers.
Are you dead? Are you dead?
All right. Well, my guest today is Rocket. Rocket, how's it going?
You know, I'm having a pretty good day. The sun came out for a minute, which is really all we can ask for.
Yeah?
Yeah, I live on a trans commune in upstate New York.
Fuck yeah. It sounds very cool.
It's really fun. I'm having a great time.
Fuck yeah. I was just up there I guess it wasn't upstate per se, but in the Hudson Valley, and it was absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, that's where I am, is the Hudson Valley. We generally say upstate to everyone who doesn't live in actual upstate.
Okay. All right. Fuck yeah. Well, not being from around those parts, I don't know the nuances. But that's awesome. Yeah, it was absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, it's leaf peeping season.
Fuck yeah. So I reached out to the universe and asked for a conversation about Spinoza. And you were kind enough to reach out to me on Instagram and say, hey, not only have I been talking about Spinoza, but all kinds of other exciting intersecting topics as well.
So I'm Jewish. I grew up Jewish. I'm a member of a renewal synagogue. Having a Jewish practice is a really big part of my magical work. And, you know, there's a lot of discourse within Judaism about whether you can be Jewish and also work with other entities. Partially because one of the commandments is, no other gods before me, which some people interpret to mean no other gods, period. And partially because the whole concept of why Jews are Jews is this idea of a covenant between the Jewish people and the God of the Jewish people, who we can call Hashem. It has a lot of names, but Hashem means the name, so I think it's the most efficient.
Okay, cool.
And the covenant is that we'll follow these commandments and we'll, live in this particular way, and we will be its people, and it will be our God, which some people interpret to be monotheism, meaning that there's one God and that all understandings of divinity are covered under that umbrella of that one God. Some people interpret that to be more like henotheism, which is, there's a lot of gods, but this one is mine. And the way that I think about it is what I had been doing for a long time without realizing this was the word for it was a more pantheist understanding, which is to say, as our shared boyfriend Spinoza said, that God is a substance consisting of infinity, that everything that you encounter, everything in the cosmos, every person, every item, every moment, every action is made of the same stuff. And that stuff is the thing that we refer to when we say the word God. That substance is infinite and infinitely malleable and infinitely diverse and heterogeneous. But it's all made of this substrate of divinity. And Spinoza wasn't the only Jewish pantheist, but most Jewish pantheists have worked historically primarily in the realm of Kabbalah, which is a kind of Jewish mysticism. And so when Spinoza tried to bring pantheism out of pure Kabbalah and into the realm of more rabbinic Judaism, nobody liked that. Or to be more specific, too many people liked it. And the rabbinic power structure got very concerned. And this is what you see. There's a very beautiful book by Mary Jane Rubenstein called Pantheologies, where she set out to write a book about the history of pantheism. And as she was researching, one of the things that she found was that pantheism is usually used as a boogeyman. There weren't a lot of people writing about pantheism as pantheists, but there were a lot of people who were using pantheism as a scare tactic, who are saying, well, we can't say this because that would lead to pantheism, and obviously we don't want that. We can't understand God as present in the living universe because that would lead to pantheism, and that's scary and bad. And so she shifted the focus of her book to be about, well, why is pantheism so scary and bad? Why is it that when anyone starts positing that divinity is present in the living universe, suddenly that's scary? And in fact, we don't have excommunication in Judaism. It's not really a thing. But Spinoza came as close as you can come. All of the rabbis kind of got together and were like, listen, bud, could you please fucking not? And Rubinstein's theory about why this is it sort of boils down to that it's just too sexy. It's too appealing. It destabilizes power structures. And so here we have to bring in another writer named Erica Lagalis, who wrote a book pretty recently in the last couple of years called Occult Features of Anarchism, which when I picked it up, I thought, oh, great, an anarchist spell book. This is exactly what I want. And it wasn't exactly that, but what it ended up being was also really cool, which was about the history of the entwinement of occultism and anarchism. And so Lagalis talks about this distinction between an immanent divine and a transcendent divine. You ever hear this distinction before?
I'm not sure, but for the sake of the listeners, definitely break it down for us, please.
So this is a thing in theology, and a lot of I think Christians argue about this, but I don't pay a ton of attention to what Christians are doing, so I couldn't tell you for sure. But a transcendent divinity is one that is separate from the universe, that is usually understood to have created the universe, but exists apart from it. And an immanent divine is one in which God is part of the universe, within it or integrated into it, and consequently into humanity. And so an immanent divinity is one that necessitates a divine humanity. So that distinction, is God part of the universe or is God separate from the universe, manifests in political theory as well, in other language. And so I actually have a quote from Lagalis here that explains. She says, "Those who suggest some coercive force stops or must stop us from pursuing our animal desires follow the logic of a transcendent divinity. Since we are by nature so evil and base, God must keep us in line. The transcendent God can be found just beneath the surface of every argument for centralized authority. Modern anarchism develops based on overlapping syncretic pagan cosmologies that behold the immanence of the divine." So what she's saying here is that if God is separate from the universe and if God is separate from humanity, then the universe and humanity are inherently base and evil. And the function of God is to create hierarchy that restrains our baseness and our evilness. And so any hierarchy that exists is connected to this logic that we must be restrained from carrying out our base and evil desires, which we would otherwise do because it is inherent in the nature of humanity to be evil.
I never considered that about hierarchy. That's very interesting.
Yeah, and so that sort of thing is infused really into the concept of the state, right? Into the concept of laws, human laws, that we would do bad stuff if we were not prevented from doing bad stuff by someone who has the authority to tell us what to do.
Sure. The old saying, like, would you still be a good person if you didn't think God was watching you or whatever?
Right, totally. And when hierarchies exist among humans, they're based on this hierarchy of the transcendent divine, that some people are closer to divinity than others, and so those are the ones who are good and who must therefore make the rules to constrain the ones who are further from divinity and therefore bad.
Sure. And this is very literal sometimes, like the divine right of kings. Yes. Okay.
Right. And also, you see it play out in other human hierarchies as well, in systems of oppression. When you look at how, for example, colonialism works, it's the idea that the people who are better, who are closer to divinity, must come in and constrain the others, the base, more animalistic, further from divinity people, who are, not by accident, who are usually less white, less Western, and less, in giant air quotes, civilized,
Mm.
from carrying out the base desires and the evil acts that they would otherwise do. So when you then look at the manifestation of an immanent divinity into political theory, it becomes the idea that humanity is inherently tends towards the good because humanity is inherently divine, and that divinity and goodness are inherent in our nature as parts of the universe, and that hierarchies must be destroyed because they constrain us from following our inherent nature, which is towards divinity and towards goodness.
All right, fuck yeah.
Yeah, it's cool, right?
Yeah, I love
and
it.
so when you see a political argument that involves or invokes an immanent divinity, it tends towards anarchism. It says hierarchies and rules and the state and all of the things that constrain human nature are things that take us further away from the divine, not bring us closer to the divine. And so they need to be dismantled or destroyed in order to allow the inherent divinity of our humanity as part of the cosmos shine through.
All right, so I'm starting to understand why this pantheism is such a dangerous idea.
It's very dangerous, right? Because also, if humanity is divine, then all of those base animalistic desires and features of being human, the things that hierarchy wants to separate itself from and denigrate and destroy, those things are divine. Our sexual urges are divine. Our desire to feel powerful and just be with each other outside of exploitative power structures, all of that is divine. And if that were to be affirmed as divine, well, where does that leave, the church? Where does that leave the structures of power that exist because they're able to say, no, I'm closer to God than you are? If everything about being alive and being human and being part of the universe is holy, that removes one of the fundamental points underlying the logic of oppression and exploitation. And so, of course, very scary and very sexy. So this is why, according to Rubinstein, and I think it makes sense, why so much of the writing about Spinoza and about the other pantheists historically has been very, very invested in making sure that it's positioned as scary, that it's positioned as unappealing, because it's such a liberatory concept. And if it were to spread, as those power structures are afraid that it will, because it's so sexy, if it were to spread, the people would rise up, and we certainly can't have that.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about this dichotomy between these ideas. Like, Spinoza takes this idea, and which is perfectly okay in this one context, and brings it into this broader, this very taboo thing of like making the secret knowledge known is sort of like part of that story I'm hearing, maybe like.
Yeah, and Kabbalah is. I know a lot of occultists talk about Kabbalah in a way that's very like filtered through Crowley and filtered through the Golden Dawn and has been turned into a totally different thing. And we don't
Almost
have to go
unrecognizable.
into.
Yes.
I certainly have opinions about that, but you can call what you're doing whatever you want, and whatever. But the thing that Kabbalah actually is has all of these really strong restrictions around knowing about it and using it and engaging with it that are really for safety's sake, according to the people who put them up. You're not supposed to, as a Jew, you're not supposed to be able to start to learn anything about Kabbalah until you're, I think, over 40 and married.
Yeah. You're supposed to like have your shit together. Yeah.
And another example of this, which I think is really funny, is, I don't know if you've ever seen this, but a lot of Jews, when they write the word God in English, they'll put a dash instead of the O.
Yeah, I heard that writing the word makes the piece of paper like become holy. So it's like we don't want to just be creating all these holy papers for no reason or something, which I guess makes sense.
Well, it's funny because it's sort of developed this reverse engineered explanation for why it is that has been applied to the English word God.
Hmm.
And the English word God is not a holy word, right? It's not a magical word. It's a category of entity. But the actual thing that that practice is pointing to is that a big part of Kabbalistic practice is working with the different names of the divine. The different names of the divine have they do stuff. They're basically magic words, right? They have functions. And you don't want to use those holy names when you're not trying to do the thing that those holy names do, right? You don't want to just be saying the magic words when you don't want to make the impact on the world that those things.
Sure. Don't push the button if you don't want the thing to happen.
Exactly. And that's why, like, Hashem is a pretty common referent, a pretty common word to use to refer to the entity that we call God. And the reason for that, as I said, literally it means the name. We can refer to the name using the term the name without having to say the name and do the things that saying the name would do in the world. And so the G-D thing has become this mythos of, like, you have to respect the name of God, or you have, it's you don't want to take it in vain, which is a Christian thing. Like, you don't want to take it lightly. But actually the reason for it is because if you start using these words of power without being trained to use them, you're going to hurt yourself.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Part of the thing that bothers me about, like, esotericist style Kabbalah with a Q, is that people are playing with stuff that they're not trained in because the training is so tightly closed and so unavailable. And you have to be really careful because it's really potent stuff. There's a foundational Kabbalistic text called Sefer Yetzirah. Rabbi Jill Hammer wrote a very beautiful book about it. And it's basically a poem. It's not a very long text, but she takes each verse of the text, and there's a whole chapter just delving into each verse. And the reason that she's able to do this is because Hebrew and Aramaic are really densely networked languages. And you'll see this in Talmud study, you'll see this in Torah study, that the texts that are written in these languages can't be read like you read a normal book. There's layers of meaning that unfurl to you as you study them. And so engaging with the original texts is jumping into an intergenerational conversation. And so the ways in which Kabbalah is more explicitly pantheist than Rabbinic Judaism, in a sense, it's a mystery, right? And when I say mystery, I don't mean that we don't know about it, but I mean it's a capital M mystery, like the archaic mysteries and the mystery cults, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what that means is that it's not that you're not allowed to talk about it. It's that you can't explain it with words in a way that means anything. Mm-hmm. You have to experience it with your body. And in the same way, when you read about the initiation rites of mystery cults, it's always said that you could describe the entire process to someone. You could tell them about the story, you could tell them about the process of preparation, you could tell them about what you see when you go into the little shed and you look at the magical objects. They could understand everything that happens, and it wouldn't do anything, mm-hmm. because it can't happen cognitively. It needs to happen somatically.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've gone a little bit afield here, but the important thing is that engaging with pantheism has to be a somatic experience. You can't just think about it. You have to have it in your body. And I think that pantheism is one of the more accessible mysteries because, what do they call it? Eudaimonia, the sort of pinnacle of a mystery initiation, which is when you take the god into your body and you feel the word eudaimonia means with the spirit. You feel with the spirit. You have it inside you. When you're engaging with divinity that is synonymous with the cosmos, right? That is between the things, that there is no space between, that lives underneath the surface of everything. It's already in your body. It's already there. It's been there the whole time. And it's more about like pulling back the curtain a little bit to let the sunshine in rather than bringing in something that wasn't already there. So I think it's much more accessible to have a somatic experience of divinity when the divinity that you're trying to open to is already a part of you.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. I like what you're saying about this kind of unfolding of awareness. You know, people say like, well, the occult is not a cult anymore. But the actual experiences of, you know, exploring these different things, like you have to actually go there. You can't just read it in a book. So that makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. And you should definitely read the books. You know, I'm
Absolutely,
also
yes.
an egghead. I spend so much, you know, all I'm doing here is citing books that I've read. But once you have that experience in your body, you come to understand that it's not something that can be communicated through words.
Sure. And I should take that back too. Like there are some times when I've read books that there have been like this kind of somatic experiences that the reading of the text itself did kind of like lead to too. So maybe sometimes you can just read the book depending on what book it is and how you approach it.
Well, you know what I think it is? I think that it's good to have a psychopomp, right?
Mhm.
It's good to have a trip sitter, someone who has been where you're going and knows how to help you get there and catch you when you come back. And, you know, that's why initiations would happen in the context of the cultus, because one way of understanding the initiation rites, right, is that it's a journey into death and a return.
Mhm.
And if you're journeying into death and returning, it's really helpful to have someone holding your hand as you walk that's been there before, that will catch you if you stumble. And importantly, that will help you integrate the experience once you return.
Mhm.
And it is possible, I think, to have someone serve as your psychopomp by reading something that they wrote.
Mm.
But I do think that it's risky because returning to life transformed, returning to feeling alone in your head, for a lot of people, and I know this is how it went down for me, it's an experience that's really painful.
Mm.
It's trying to reintegrate into normal life after that. I think there's a lot of shame really involved. A sort of a spiritual hangover. And I know for me, I tried to do that without having anyone who knew the way and could talk me through it. And it was really hard. I went crazy and I stayed crazy for about a year before I found my way back. And I had plenty of books, but what I didn't have was someone who knew how to hold me through it.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of us in today's world that are playing with this stuff don't have someone who can do that for us. And I think that's why so many of us are suffering so much and why so many people, you know, break and drop out.
Yeah. Well, I'm so sorry to hear that you know, had to experience that and everything. That sounds like it was a rough thing to go through for sure. Would you mind if I asked you a question about it?
Oh, of course.
Okay. I'm just curious, like, you know, kind of thinking constructively here, were there some, you know, maybe signs that you might have noticed, like, you know, looking back on it that you would, you know, warn others about, like, you know, hey, if this kind of thing is starting to occur, like maybe you might want to consider, like, were there any, you know, is there anything that you might point to as like pitfalls that people might want to watch out for, or like, you know, signs of possible trouble based on your own experience?
Yeah, I think so. Here's what happened. This was a little more than 10 years ago now, and a bunch of us had gotten together to do this ritual of trans divinity. And so we pulled in all of the deities and entities that we could find that were somewhere in that realm of what we would now call trans or gender nonconforming. And each of the ritualists picked one to bring in, right, to allow into our bodies. And we were kids. We didn't know what we were doing.
Mm.
And at this point I would say, was that a smart idea? Definitely not. But that's what we did. And so we each invited in one of these divinities, and the idea was that we would bring the blessings of the legacy of trans holiness to the community of trans revelers that were there with us. And so I invited in this entity who goes by the name Agdistis. Have you ever heard this name before?
I don't believe so, but I'm notoriously bad at names.
So Agdistis is an entity from Phrygian myth coming through Greek myth, and they were created when the goddess Cybele, who's one of the Earth Mothers, she was having a little nap on Mount Agdis, and Zeus came by, and because it's Zeus, he decided that he wanted to try and get some.
Because he's a creep, yeah.
Because he's a creep 100% of the time. And she fought him off. The goddess fought him off. And he, let's say, finished on a rock of the mountain. And where his seed fell, and I would argue where the site of that divine trauma occurred, that divine sexual trauma occurred, Agdistis sprang up out of the rock. And they, according to the story, were neither male nor female, but had the power of both manness and womanness. And two more things to know about Agdistis. One is that canonically they were really, really hot, and that they were completely out of their mind. And of course, being born from this moment of sexual violation and violation of the bodily integrity of the Earth Mother, right? Of course, they're bonkers. And so they came to be through this moment of breaking. And as I said, they were just the babeliest babe that anyone had ever seen. And so, and the madness in them was in their blood, in their body, in every part of them. And so anyone who came into contact with their blood, or I think any other of their bodily fluids, caught the madness, also became mad in the way that they were mad. And many of the people who were infected with the divine madness of Agdistis, that madness expressed itself through self-castration, or if they were people who had breasts, through cutting off the breasts. And so Agdistis was banging their way across the continent, leaving a trail of carnage and gender explosions behind them. And the Olympians were like, ooh, that's a problem. That's making us feel weird feelings, and we want to make it go away. And so they called Dionysus, who was just a little baby demigod at that point and didn't know anything. And they were like, okay, Dionysus, we know you want to sit at the big kids table, and we're gonna let you. You just have to do this one little favor for us first. You just have to get rid of this monster that's freaking us out. You just have to go destroy Agdistis. And so Dionysus went to the place where Agdistis usually hung out, and there was a fountain there. There was like a spring, and Dionysus turned the spring into wine, because that's Dionysus's thing. And so Agdistis showed up, drank from the spring as normal, but of course it wasn't normally wine, and so Agdistis got drunk and fell asleep. And while they were sleeping, Dionysus snuck up and tied with a rope, tied the external part of their genitals to their foot, so that when they woke up and stood up, they castrated themselves and bled to death. Now, there's another part of the story which is around Dionysus was splashed with Agdistis's blood as a result of this. Dionysus went mad himself. That's why Dionysus is the mad god that he is. And he found sanctuary in the cult of Cybele. He went through Cybele's rites, which included becoming a priestess, right? Which included what we would now call gender transition. And that's why all of this is why Dionysus has the epithets that they have of the womanly one and the, and pseudo false man. All of that is because of this interaction with Agdistis that broke Dionysus in the way that Dionysus goes on to break us open.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. But also, and this is the thing, right? Is that Agdistis is the ancestor of spirit of anyone whose gender is too much for the systems of power that try to crush us. And anyone who has had their body hurt, who has been attacked, who has been made to bleed because their gender is too much, their sex is too much, they're too much in one of these ways, Agdistis is there for them, right? And so I, being young, dumb, and full of cum, as we all were at that time, invited Agdistis into my body for this ritual, which was a really cute idea. And the ritual went off really well. And then Agdistis did not want to leave. And I did not have the skills or the support from any kind of, high skill magical community to know how to get back in the driver's seat of my body.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And so they had busted the door of my psyche off of its hinges, and now it just wouldn't latch anymore. And all of my psychic defenses were just a ruin, and I couldn't keep them out. And this is the thing, if you've ever had an entity come into you like this, you don't want to keep them out. It feels so good to have them there, which is adaptive for them, right?
Sure. Yeah, I was just going to say that makes sense because, yeah, adaptive is a great word. Yes.
That's how they can get incarnate, is because having a god inside you feels so good you don't care if you die. And I happened to not die, but for a year I couldn't think about anything but them, and I couldn't sleep. I didn't want to eat. I didn't need anything but them. And I didn't accidentally starve to death or, tank all of my relationships or get fired from my job or anything like that. But I very easily could have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so all of this is to say, becoming a mystic for a lot of people involves a period of madness. And me throwing up a warning flag isn't going to stop that from being true for anyone if it's going to happen to you. But one of the pieces of wisdom that Agdistis has taught us is that the small madness protects us from the great madness. And so the small madness is the practices that we have, that we find, that we make, that allow us to touch that feeling of, de-differentiation, of the dissolution of the self into something larger, of eudaimonia. And you can get that from trance, you can get it from breath work, you can get it from dancing or drumming or pain or orgasm. You can also call it gnosis. All roads up a mountain lead to the top, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the small madness acts as sort of a pressure valve. And if you don't have access to the small madness, the great madness will come to you. And the great madness is when you just straight up fall into it and can't find your way out. And so incorporating the small madness into your practice is a protective measure against losing your mind.
All right, well, fuck yeah.
The other thing that I want to share, the other part of the practice that we do here, we call it the Agdistine order, the order of Agdistis. And they want to be connected to living trans and gender nonconforming people. They want to be there for the people that they understand to be their people. And so I want to encourage anyone who's hearing this story and feeling it like touch something inside them to look into them and to maybe start to build a relationship. And if you want to learn more about them, please reach out to me. I have tons of resources that I want to share, partially because now that we've gotten to a stable and not bonkers relationship, working with them has been so supportive and so beautiful and has opened up so many places in me that I didn't think existed. And partially because that's what they want, right? They want you to know that they're here. They want you to reach out to them.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm hearing a lot of crossover with my own deity work. And yes, thank you. I want to hear more about this, and I want to hear about the trans elevation rite. But first, how do you feel about taking a bibliomancy break?
I would love that.
All right, fuck yeah. It's me, Luxa from the future. I hope you're enjoying the show so far. Thank you for listening. You've just heard Intellectual Contagion by PG Warfare from Fuck Around and Find Out Part 2, The Green Mushroom Project and We the Hollow digital mixtape. Find a link to that in the show notes. Big thanks to everybody who contributed audio to that project. We have a lot more great stuff to get into here too, including the bibliomancy break, trans rite of ancestor elevation, thoughts about doing ancestor work further back in the generations, Temple of Psychic Youth, or Temple of Psychic Individuals, as I believe it's now called, and the cut-up technique, the Pantheism project, and so much more. Rocket made some great points just now about working with entities and what some of the possible pitfalls can be like. It's wise to think about who it is that we're inviting in and what type of an entity they're supposed to be. A lot of folks insist on making entities prove they are who they claim to be as well. A big part of my daily magical practice right now is devotional work, which is mostly done for Hecate, although of course I work with others too. There are times when I feel very close to her, which is a strange thing to say because at first a lot of what I was doing was simply trying to get my head around the idea of what gods or deities are, at least the way that other people seem to think about it. I probably wouldn't have wanted to work with her if there wasn't something there already for me, though. Something aesthetic. Some of the stuff and the symbolism associated with her works really well for me. In addition to this, there's all kinds of other things that mesh as well. So I conceptualize ethics and power and the manner in which it functions and how some of her mythology works. It all works pretty well. Rocket's point about the period of madness that becoming a mystic seems to be correlated with certainly tracks as well. It's definitely the case that there have been a few times in the past in my magical practice where I've decided to just shut it all down for a little bit so that I could figure out how to be a human again. I think I mostly did. Not that I was ever super great at it in the first place. I kid, of course. But yes, I think it's important to be very honest with yourself about where you're at psychologically and emotionally, and to make sure that you're doing enough grounding activities, simple things like cleaning your house and taking care of yourself physically, and that you have a good support structure in place. All that stuff is probably a good idea regardless of any esoteric considerations as well, though. So magic is intentionally destabilizing in many contexts because we're asking for things to change. In addition to this, when we engage in magic, magical thinking is necessarily going to be a part of that, which is fine. But magical thinking is also something that is associated with some types of mental disorders and can also lead to pretty destructive places in some instances. So to remain balanced, I would advocate that when one engages in magical thinking, it's good not to forget that that's what you're doing when you're doing it, unless it's like the heat of the moment in ritual or whatever. I'm kind of talking about a general everyday going on with your life. You know, embracing the paradox or contradiction. Light is both a wave and a particle, right? It's good to find some ways of doing reality testing here too, if you're finding yourself kind of like bowled over by constant synchronicities. The volume of this stuff can be turned down by engaging in alternate perspectives about what might be going on, and it can be turned up by doing that as well. You know, there's a lot of places that we have a lot of power in how our perception is coming to us and also being interpreted by us. Skepticism is a fantastic antidote for credulity, and there's all kinds of little things like this which are good to keep in mind if you're playing around with magic. Okay, let's get back to my conversation with Rocket, and to lead us into that, let's hear another track from Fuck Around and Find Out Part 2. Stay tuned after the interview for an update about the Green Mushroom Project, as well as to hear the gematria and cut-up work that Keats Ross of the Prag Magic podcast and central haunt of the We the Hollowed International Occult and Arctic Artists Collective did to find the track order for that project. I'll share the piece as well as about the method Keats used to create it. But now, this is Muma, written by Guillermo Zagara and read by Yaramarode. Cheers.
Muma by Guillermo Zagara, read by Yaramarode. Magic is everywhere, on the moon, in the stars, and up my ass. Tonight is the wolf moon, a time to abandon what no longer serves me, a time to replenish, and a time for Muma, or moonlight up my ass. The pandemic, a job loss, death in the family. It's been a rough year. Lots of tears, white knuckling, and teeth grinding. I need a good laugh and a major reset. During a full moon, I like to go out, spread my butt cheeks, and fill my root chakra with lunar energy. A spiritual colonic. At least that's what I tell myself. Either way, Muma is ridiculous. It fills me with warm, mischievous glee and helps unleash the kraken of negativity. At midnight, I grab a blanket and follow a nearby trail to the creek. When I get there, I lay out the blanket and strip from the waist down. A light, frigid breeze shrivels my balls, but stifled laughter helps keep me warm. I get into a downward dog pose. My ass faces the bright full moon under the clear, glimmering starlight. I take 3 deep breaths and recite a prayer for Muma. O holy Luna, in the night sky, shining down upon me, enlighten my brown eye. Celestial wisdom guides me and helps me to discern that which I must cultivate and that which I must learn. Muma comes and Muma goes, Muma teaches, Muma knows, Muma beams on all it sees, by the power of Muma, so shall it be. My butthole tingles with lunar energy. I lay on my back, pull in my knees, and spread my butt cheeks apart in a happy baby pose. I take 3 deep breaths and repeat the prayer. Luna's wisdom permeates my being with unity, connection, and non-dualism. I release my butt cheeks, relax into corpse pose, and bask in the moonlight afterglow. The sound of crunching leaves and rhythmic footsteps startles me out of my bliss. I grab my sweatpants, shove my feet in, and pull them over my knees. Then I arch my back and tug the sweatpants over my hips. I slow down my breath and melt back into corpse pose. The leaf crunching stops. Shadows coalesce until a blonde, curly-haired goddess stands over me. She radiates Luna's bright light. Oh, hello. I look up and reply, Hey, lovely night, huh? She notices me lying in corpse pose and says, Great idea. I'll have to try that next time. I nod with a timid grin. Did she bust me getting Muma? Enjoy the wolf moon, she says with a smile. You too, I reply. The goddess heads east along the creek. I sit up and notice her black tights and shapely legs. It would be nice to see her again. I put my socks and sneakers on, get to my feet, and fold the blanket. Then I burst into an uncontrollable giggle fit. Laughter is the best medicine.
Hey, what's up? I'm Luxa.
And I'm Josh. Are you looking for a chill place to hang out online and chat about chaos magic, occultism, witchcraft, and more? Are you hoping to learn and share your knowledge and experience in a place that is welcoming to folks of all different backgrounds and identities?
If so, check out the Green Machine Discord server, home of the Green Mushroom Project and Administrism. Our growing community of chaotes, occultists, sorcerers, witches, and weirdos has all kinds of fun and interesting things going on. From chats and rituals to workshops, clubs, and more. There's a lot of cool opportunities to get involved.
Sounds great, Luxa. How can folks find us?
Well, for now, we're keeping things pretty small as we grow, so we're not advertising on any of the Discord services that do that. But folks can hit me up and I will send them a link. You can reach me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com, or you can find me on Instagram at luxoccultpod.
Fuck yeah!
Fuck yeah. Alright, so the way that this works is I will ask you to say the question, and then I will roll some dice, and we'll figure out what text I will be using, and then I will go grab it, and we'll do the divination.
Okay, awesome. So the question that I have is really about efficiency, I think is the term. It's that when I think about the work that I'm doing, a lot of it is one-on-one with other alive people. And that feels really nourishing and it feels really effective, but it doesn't feel efficient. And so I think my question is, as I'm thinking about trying to scale up and speak to more people at once and do magical work that has a broader impact than just within one-on-one relationships, what do I need to know, or what do I need to keep in mind as I'm scaling up?
All right, fantastic. Well, let me see what text we will be using here. It's going to be from the Satanic Bible by Anton Salzar-Levay.
Oh boy. Well, I mean, he certainly knew something about scale, right?
Absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and go grab that, and I will be right back here. All right, well, I have located the text here, the Satanic Bible by Anton Salzar-Levay. Eris, please tell us, as Rocket is looking to scale up their work, how might this be facilitated? Okay, so it's the 5th key in Enochian, and it starts about halfway through. Na zod harafehe afa od delugare zodesodope zodelia kaseo sagia tol torgeai od zod cassiai. So thank you, Eris.
Wow, that was
This is the
certainly
most
elucidating.
obtuse answer yet.
What I'm going to take from this is that being comprehensible is really the wrong way to go.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I
absolutely.
did hear the word gay in there also.
Yes, I think there was some gay in there. There definitely was. And I don't know if 5th or 5 means anything to you, or key, or dealing with angels, perhaps, as the Enochian tradition purports to do. So yes, I'm not sure, but thank you, Eris. Regardless, regardless
for
of whether
this.
I understand the answers, I always appreciate them. So fuck yeah.
And really, when we think about using language to communicate, it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that the content of the language itself is the message. And it's always a trap. The content, the medium is the message, not the content.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was silly.
Yes, I try to have a little silliness interspersed here. I always expect a little silliness when I call in Eris. You never know how she's gonna show up. So, but I always appreciate it. I'm hoping you can tell me a little bit about the trans elevation rate, which I think is coming up pretty soon. I'm hoping to get this episode out in time for people to hear about it.
Yeah, so it's an annual rate. We've been doing it since 2014, I think. and maybe 2015. I don't know. Time has my grasp on linear time wasn't strong to begin with, and then COVID happened, and now it's just gone forever. We've been doing it for a number of years, and it was based on this idea. When I say we, I mean we in the Agdistine order, although we did not coalesce as the Agdistine order specifically until we'd already been doing the ancestor elevation, the trans ancestor elevation work for a few years. It's based on a ritual that we learned that was initially a Santeria ritual that is about providing support to our honored dead to allow them to sort of be able to release their suffering and the traumas of life and the traumas of the process of dying and move into a place of peace. And so we do this ritual every year around the Trans Day of Remembrance. The Trans Day of Remembrance, for those of you who don't know, is a day that is set aside for honoring and mourning those members of our trans and gender nonconforming family worldwide who've been taken from us in the year leading up to it, whether by transphobic violence or by suicide or simply by the ongoing implicit violence of living in a world that thinks that we shouldn't exist. And there are a few organizations that gather names of the trans and gender nonconforming family members who've been taken from us each year. And on the Trans Day of Remembrance, part of the practice is to read the names aloud and to, offer love and care and what healing may be available to those beloved dead. And we call on ancestor helping spirits to do this with us. We do divination every year to ask the ancestor helping spirits what offerings they think are right for this year, and if they're up for participating this year, because not all of them are up for doing it every year. One of the ancestor helping spirits that we call on in the ritual of the elevation, of the trans ancestor elevation, is Agdistis, as certainly not the first, but a first trans ancestor who lost their life to transphobic violence. And so all of their descendants of spirit who share that experience of transphobic violence with them, they have care for, they have love for, they want to reach out to, whether living or dead. And over the years, we've been refining this ritual. When we started out, it was very rough because we were trying to give as an offering to our beloved dead that we would hold their trauma for them in our living bodies. And it turns out that's brutal and not a great idea.
That does sound very rough. Yes.
Yeah, it's not sustainable if you want to continue to be an alive person. But I took this class with this practitioner named Taya Ma, who teaches courses on Jewish ancestor work. And one of the things that she teaches is that when you have recently transitioned, and I know saying transitioned when we're talking about trans dead is a little muddy, but here I mean transitioned to being dead. Recently transitioned beloved dead, particularly if they lived in pain and isolation and died in pain and isolation. As the living, you don't want to work directly with those suffering, traumatized ancestors because they don't yet know how to engage with the living without hurting the living. And so it's much better, it's much more consistent with tradition and also safer as the living to reach out further back in our ancestral lines. And that's both ancestors of spirit, those who came before us in the work that we do and in the lives that we lead, and our ancestors of blood and lineage, our literal lineage, the people who gave birth to the people who gave birth to us and so forth. to reach back in our ancestral lines beyond the point of that trauma to the ancestors who were connected to living practices around dying and death and being with the dead, and who knew how to die and knew how to be dead and can bring in the more recent dead and teach them what they need to know. And this is true if you're doing any ancestor work, whether it's with your ancestors of spirit, like the trans lineages, or with the ancestors of your blood, that, you know, especially if you live, as I do, in America, and in many places across the world, but this is the experience that I know. Most of the people that live on this continent have, in the last, let's say, 7 or 8 generations of their family, some kind of really unimaginable generational traumatic break of some kind, whether that's genocide or forced migration or whatever it is. Many of the people who are living on this continent are living here because something happened, something very, very bad happened not that long ago in your ancestral line.
Mm.
And that can be a real barrier to doing ancestor work for a lot of people, because you'll start to reach out to your ancestors, and what you'll get is this avalanche of ancestral trauma from recently here, meaning in the last handful of generations, past people who were separated from their own ancestral traditions, as are many of us, and so experienced horrific things during their life at the point of their death, and didn't have access to their own ancestral traditions that would have allowed them to, as I think it was Euripides said, live in joy and die without fear, which is the goal of a lot of these traditions, right?
Yeah.
And so you reach back to try to connect with your ancestors, and all you get is screaming. And for a lot of people, I think that's a bit of a turnoff.
Sure. Yeah.
And so what I learned from Taya is that, yeah, of course we have this break. If you can reach past the break to your older ancestors, 15, 20, 40, 60 generations ago, that was a time when people had living traditions around dying and death and the dead, whether that was in Judaism or in other types of practices. And so those of our ancestors that lived and died at that time had those practices, knew how to die, knew how to be ancestors, and they know how to connect with us and want to connect with us. And they've been waiting. And so if you're able to reach past that break and connect with those older ancestors, those bright and well ancestors, a lot of the time what you'll find is they'll say, "Hey, there you are," and they want to be, and that's true for Agdistis as well, right? They want to be on your team. They want to be in your corner. You're the living face of their line. And what an honor and a blessing to be the living faces of these lines. And when you connect with them and they're able to have a connection to the world of the living again, it's beautiful. Things suddenly start going right.
Yeah, I love that. That's so beautiful. Thank you.
I feel like there's a big divide, and we talked about this on Instagram a little bit. I think that there's sort of a divide between people who think of themselves as like polytheists and people who think of themselves as occultists. And I don't see a lot of people. I know you're largely in a world of like occultism and esotericism, and I don't see a lot of people in that world who talk a lot about doing ancestor work.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that is talked about. A lot of times it might come up more in contexts of like necromancy. I've noticed that there's several different sets of language to describe similar things oftentimes too. So I think that there's a lot of different ways of contextualizing this too. So, but yeah, I mean, I think that ancestor work is definitely something that it's an important part of like pretty much every kind of magical tradition that we look at. And so, I mean, just for that reason alone, it would suggest that it's something that is valuable and important.
Right. It's not, when you see something that like pops up independently in a bunch of different traditions that developed very far
It's
away from
always
each
a
other,
thing. It's
you're like,
probably a thing. Yeah. Fuck yeah. Well, do you have time to talk a little bit about cut-ups, or have I exhausted your afternoon?
listen, there's no moment in my life when I don't want to talk about cut-ups. I always want to talk about cut-ups. Because we were talking earlier about how the format of your podcast is a little like a cut-up.
Yes, and I actually took that as a huge compliment, so thank you.
I've heard you talk on previous episodes about like Burroughs and Geisen and Spare and
Yeah.
the ways in which they used cut-ups for as spells.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually was just lucky enough to have taken a class with Dr. Vanessa Sinclair and Carl Abrahamson about
Cool.
cut-ups and all kinds of other things, Burroughs Geisen, and getting into Temple of Psychic Youth stuff. And yeah, really, really great
Uh-huh.
class. And yeah,
I was about to
actually going
ask
to
if
be
you've
talking to Vanessa soon, so I'm excited about that.
Oh, sick. Yeah, I was about to ask if you'd read any like Genesis Peorage.
Fuck yeah. Oh yes, huge influence. Fuck yeah.
Right?
The
And so
Psychic Bible. Yeah, fuck yeah.
I found my first copy of the Psychic Bible like on the sidewalk. Which
Really?
is, I think, the best way for a copy of the Psychic Bible to come into your life.
That's
And
so
this is
rad.
the
Fuck
really
yeah.
cool thing. It's the previous owner had like doodled in it, so it's full of these weird little drawings. I love it so
Oh, that's
much.
so fucking rad. Fuck yeah.
Did you ever learn about the Pandragine?
Yes, yes, the Pandragine experiment is really, really fascinating. But for the sake of the listeners,
Mhm.
could you kind of give a little bit of context for folks who haven't heard of it?
Yeah, so the Pandragine experiment was a project that Genesis did with their partner Lady J. And the two of them, they met actually at Paddles, which is a BDSM club in New York City, where I also met one of my partners. So I feel very
Oh my
connected to Genesis
gosh.
like that.
Is it still around? I want to go to there.
Unfortunately, COVID took it, and
No.
it was a real heartbreak. I've spent a lot of very weird times in that grody basement.
It sounds amazing.
But I'm very sad to say that because kinky orgies in a grody unventilated basement is not the most COVID safe thing you could be doing.
That doesn't sound super
I get
COVID
it.
friendly. I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Um, and well, so they met at Paddles, and they had one of those. You lock eyes across the sex club, and you know that this is the person that you're going to spend your life with. We've all been there. And they started doing this project where they wanted to, as much as possible, become one being. And they both underwent really extensive plastic surgery in order to look as much alike as possible.
Mhm.
And in Genesis's writings about the Pandragine, they described it as a cut-up of the body that,
Mhm.
in the same way as a cut-up as you normally think of it, is breaking the linear flow of things in order to let what's concealed inside it out.
Mhm.
The two of them conceptualized the Pandragine project as using the self as an artistic medium, as raw material, and the self not just in terms of the self-conception, but also the body.
Mhm.
And so what I would say, if we bring the pantheism back into this, right? Peorage said that the cut-up was a means of accessing the creative power that formed the matter of the universe, which we can also call God, if we were inclined to call things God. Peorage described that substance, that creative power, as a unified source, an infinite, open, timeless, intricate quaquaversal frequency field in constant flux. And that when you did a cut-up, according to Peorage, what you were doing was accessing that field by breaking through the barrier between our day-to-day experience and it.
And with the Pandragine project, as you said, like very literally like somatically with their bodies, like inviting this third person, this briar, to emerge as this
Yes.
sort of like third mind, like the third, not really a combination or a hybrid, but something new entirely, almost, as far as I understand it. And yeah, it's very interesting and cool.
Yeah. And allowing something to be revealed and in its revelation to be transformed, right? They would say it was to deconstruct in order to reconstruct.
Mhm.
And part of what the two of them were talking about was what they called control with a capital C, right? Control here being the sort of systems of hierarchy and power and exploitation that manifest in our society and in our lives. And a lot of Genesis's work was aimed at damaging control and using the cut up of the body to damage control. And so looking at this, I don't think toward the end of their life, I think Genesis started identifying with the term non-binary. Actually, their recently posthumously published memoir what is called non-binary. But for a long time, they weren't thinking of themselves as trans in the way that most people today think about that word, but rather that their goal as an artist and as an enemy of control was to be constantly remaking the self in every possible way.
Yeah, fuck yeah. Like, one of the things that has been really influential on me about Genesis's work is just this idea of, creating art that recreates the self. Like, through this artistic practice, you're not just creating the art, but the art is creating you too. And that's something that I've found a lot of power in. It's very cool.
Absolutely. And when you're creating art, the medium of which is your own literal body, whether that's through, movement or whether it's through gender affirming surgery, like the trans body is a work of art. The process of transitioning is a process of accessing the divine substrate of the creative force of the universe in order to be guided by that creative force towards a more joyful way of being embodied. And so, of course, transness is holy. How could it not be?
Fuck yeah. Well, Rocket, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. Is there anything that you would like to talk about that I haven't asked you about, or do you have any questions that you would like to ask me?
I just want to thank you for taking the time to talk to me. I'm constantly trying to find people who will talk to me about cut-ups and all of this stuff. And I really appreciate the space and the conversation. And also, as we were talking about during the Bibliomancy break, that as I'm trying to figure out what scaling up my practice looks like, making it more effective, giving it a bigger lever, I appreciate that you giving me this time feels like a gift.
Oh, well, I appreciate that too. The very interesting things that you shared with the listeners and I today is absolutely a gift. So much appreciated as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So where can listeners find your work?
So the trans rite of ancestor elevation we're on Tumblr. And our Tumblr is just trans-rite.tumblr.com. So please come hang out with us over there. This year's rite will be starting, it's mid-November. It usually starts on November, I think, 14th. So it's a couple of weeks from now. It'll be, I think, soon when you're listening to this. You can also find me on Instagram at Andy, EYE Andy. And I mod a small Discord server called the Anarcho-Surrealist Wizard Brigade. And if you are or would like to be an Anarcho-Surrealist Wizard in our brigade, drop me a line somewhere and I'll send you an invite link. Not to step on the toes of your awesome Discord server, which I'm also in and also really enjoy. And I think
there are plenty of Discords to go around. So yeah, and I'm actually a member of yours too, and it is very cool. I wish I had more time to socialize. But yes.
Yeah, I think that's where I am. And if you're around the Hudson Valley and you want to do weird magic around a fire together, hit me up.
All right, well, fuck yeah, I might just do that. That sounds very fun.
Yeah, come visit me.
Rocket, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a good one.
Thank you so much. It's lovely talking with you. I hope we get to talk again soon.
Too. Fuck yeah. Thanks so much to Rocket for joining me and for sharing their perspectives. So much to think about and to unpack there. Check the show notes for links about the trans rite of ancestor elevation, their Instagram, some stuff about Agdistis. Rocket also let me know that the Dokyet paper isn't up on the Brill site anymore, but if anybody wants to read it, just message Rocket from somewhere and they can send you a PDF. I highly recommend checking it out. It's fire. So the connection between Agdistis and Dionysus makes me want to mention the conversation that I had with J.S. Groves at the Sorcerer's Workbench about working with Dionysus and doing planetary magic, too. I think that conversation would be a great companion to this one. That's episode 66. I've been playing a fair bit with planetary magic over the recent years, and hearing Jeffrey's takes on working with the stuff from the Picatrix and more was quite illuminating. I've recently begun sharing about a means of approaching planetary work, which I discovered through experimentation and have been, fleshing out over the last year or so. I'm calling it zodiacal pathworking. I led a workshop about it on the Green Machine Discord server last Friday during our usually scheduled Fungal Friday chat. It seemed to go over pretty well. I really wasn't sure if it would make any sense to anybody but me, but a few people have begun playing with it and have found some interesting things that actually line up pretty well with what I found. So I'm cautiously optimistic about it having the potential to be interesting and perhaps useful to some people. I've learned some interesting things from playing with it, so I don't know. I'll be hosting another chat this Friday, November the 10th, 2023, which might be tomorrow as this comes out, doing a recap about that, as well as hearing about how things went for people who got the chance to play around with it. We have a bunch of other cool stuff going on with the Green Mushroom Project as well right now. Some exciting experiments. I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a few minutes. I did want to mention that in doing the production work and everything for this, one thing that I've been reflecting back on especially is this idea of ancestor work. 'Tis the season, after all. I really like Rocket's perspectives here, especially what Rocket said about it being an honor to be the living representative of your line, whether that's in a biological blood relation sense or in a more spiritual, philosophical, or esoteric sense. Many of the ancestors I work with are people whose work has influenced the way I think or the way that I live in the world. Learning about the lives of some of the people who I think about in this way has helped me find context for my own thoughts and sometimes even allowed me to learn from both good and bad examples of, how to be in the world and how to handle one's shit, perhaps. There can sometimes be a sense of kinship that I experience too when I meet other people who look to some of the same spiritual ancestors as I do. And I suppose this kind of makes sense, right? We are sort of a family in that way, having these shared ancestors. Not only is that true, but also in like a very much broader sense, we are all blood ancestors too, by the way. We all share relation commonly, and the places where we draw these lines is as artificial as, drawing property lines on a map. And speaking of being one big happy family, I should mention here the other wonderful podcasts on the Green Mushroom Podcast Network. We've got Administrism, Grognostics, Primordia, Ad Hoc History, Smuts Up, Unearthing Paranormalcy, XV Planus, and now our newest show, Camera Occulta. Check out the first episode in which Pythia, which you can also hear on Administrism, and Flood from XV Planus discuss a dark song and the Abramelin adjacent working which is depicted therein. It's good shit, so check it out where fine pods are cast. Speaking of other programming notes, I'm never far from my tinfoil hat, and neither should you be, so put that bad boy on and check out a special edition of Ad Hoc History. Asher, my brother, and my podcast brothers from Other Mothers, Dave from Unearthing Paranormalcy and Flood from XV Planus, and I all sat down for a very fun discussion on the disclosure issue the other day. We go into some very fun history on the topic of UFO sightings and experiencers and discuss the recent Senate hearings about UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, and the possibility of non-human biologics. We get into some more spooky and esoteric territory as well. I make the case at one point for one of my favorite out there hypotheses, the idea of life being an ambient force like gravity, Flood being a paranormal investigator, and Dave having done so much research and reading into all topics spooky were fantastic guests. It was a really, really fun time. We're getting a lot of positive feedback about it, so we're definitely going to be doing more of that in the future. So that's available now on the Ad Hoc History RSS feed, or check the show notes for a link. Ad Hoc History, it's not the history podcast you wanted, it's the history podcast you deserve. Another thing you can check the show notes for is a link to all of the great Green Mushroom Podcast Network shows, as well as to my new album of ritually produced oral erotica, A Void Machine Adjustment. Alright, let's do listener mail and shoutouts. Greetings to Ben. Thanks for writing. Glad you enjoyed the last episode with Laurel about the Catholic saints. I love your perspective about them really being into helping people and sort of jumping at the chance, no matter if it's a little old veiled grandma who's asking or somebody else. Very cool. Shout out to Dave Neal. I like the perspective that trauma can become tied in with perception, and that the Buddhist noble truth of suffering being caused by expectation or want, that definitely tracks. I think it makes sense to consider here. You can check out my conversations with Dave in episode 26, Metacognition, Neuroplasticity, and Healing from Trauma, and episode 45, The Democratization of Desire. Shout out to Sir Justin. So stoked that you enjoyed hearing about the number stations in the latest episode. It's always been a topic which has fascinated me. Fuck yeah. Salutations to Will. That's so cool that you're having a custom green mushroom steel mace made. I'm fucking jealous. If people are interested in checking out Steel Mace Flow or Steel Mace Strong, which is strength training using a steel mace, Fourth Dimension Fitness is a rad place to do that. Studying that stuff with someone who is also a magician adds a lot of cool elements to it, for me at least. And contrary to what seems to be a popular opinion, it's not as crazy and hardcore as it might appear. It's quite enjoyable. Check it out. You can also hear a conversation about Steel Mace Flow and Sigils in episode 44. Many thanks and much love to Laura, Miguel, Skella, and Frater Damiana for all of their help with putting together and conducting the ceremony to celebrate the 3rd anniversary of the founding of the Green Mushroom Project. The Pirates Revel went swimmingly, and I'm so grateful to have had the chance to celebrate with all of the folks in attendance. Fuck yar! More updates on the Green Mushroom Project to come. Real quick, if you like this show and you're into what I've got going on here, you can support it on Patreon. Making it is kind of a wild amount of work, especially just for one intrepid podcaster, but it definitely means a lot to me to be able to do it. So thank you so much to the people who are making that possible by giving on Patreon or buy me a coffee, and to the people who are supporting the show by spreading the word and giving it positive reviews and stars and all of that good stuff. Tell your soccer coach and lifting buddies about the show. Tell the people standing in line at the GNC and all the people on your roller derby and wrestling teams. Tell your chef and your driver and all of your hench people too. You can also post about it on social media or write a positive review. All of these things are super helpful, so thank you very much to everybody who is doing so. And yes, don't forget to smash the fucking shit out of that follow button so you can get updates when new episodes come out. You can find Lux Occult, Hello Void, and other merchandise available at Illumin Industries, which is my Etsy store. Items will be printed on demand using the most eco-friendly options I could find and shipped directly to you at pretty close to cost. There's some pretty fun stuff in there, so check it out. Thanks to Laughing Dog, aka T.A. Grady, for designing the Hello Void t-shirt. The grand prize winners of the Tentacle Poetry Contest will be getting something fun from there, and all of the winners will receive swag bags, which I am in the process of putting together. Still waiting on a couple of cool items there. It's been a fun time assembling this stuff, so fuck yeah. Alright, so let's talk about Fuck Around and Find Out Part 2 and the cut-up poem that Keats Ross made using the track titles. Okay, so after I gathered up all of the awesome submissions for the mixtape, I asked Keats Ross from over at We the Hollowed to toss some chaos into the mix and find a way to randomize the track order. Here's a bit of what he wrote about how he accomplished that. You can find a link in the show notes to the post on wethehollow.org where you can read more of his thoughts about it, by the way. So he says, I was tasked to randomize the track list, so what I did was some magical gematria poetry. I found the ALW calculation for each of the 39 song titles, bibliomantically chose phrases of equal value via personal and listening post alpha indexes, and then composed a cut-up poem from these findings. The track sequence is placed solely by its psychedelic counterpart of the poem itself. Alright, fuck yeah. So Keats took the track title, ran it through the ALW cipher to find a number. To hear more about that and ghost boxes and gematria with Bobby Hale, check out episode 67, by the way. And Keats used indexes that Listening Post Alpha participants have been constructing to choose other phrases of equal numerical values. So, by the way, Listening Post Alpha is Bobby Hale's project, so context there. A sort of classic way of using gematria ciphers, right, these equal number values. So Keats then made a poem with the findings, giving us our track order. At least if I understand correctly. Anyway, let me first read a list of the tracks on the mixtape to give you some context, and then I'll share the poem. So here is what the tracks sound like when you read them as a poem. Call of Cthulhu, the elemental tables of Judy's jungle, Nell, Rishi, Trove, Fukufino, Pro-Spectre Ritual, Void Cat Cometh, Evocation of Elder Creation and Destruction, Bloodletting, Thought Infestation, Reality Tunnels, Hawthorne, Dixit Spiritum, Muma, Saddle Up, Elecampane, Coagula, Intellectual Contagium, Grim Jest, Mindbender's Goddess Sonnets, Luna, The Autumnal Bruise in the Bellows, Approaching Quietus, The Ethnogenic Prayer, The Illusion of Separation, Vested 23, The World Behind Doors, Magnetic Distillate, Initiation, Hyperbeam, Earth, New Lands, WTF, Compressed Layers, The Hex Cassette, Ascending and Descending in Power, Necrofancy, Praise Nematona. Alright, fuck yeah. So now, here is the cut-up poem. He that is filthy shall be filthy still, yea, dust, for love and her soft feet, willing, light devour, neither, witches and weirdos, come in our passionate peace and right sweet, secret name, the circles come into, division hither, feast for the first, swoon of the excellent, bosom will hide, a secret door into the house of aeons, purple beyond purple, communion, my color is black to the blind, a sword, sun, strength, and sight light these, work the work of wickedness, now let the light devour men, writing the book of the audiomancy, there are rituals coiled about to spring, a feast for water, perish with, haint, ha death, end. What is balanced by deep trance or swoon, burnt down and shattered yet an invisible house there, hate the hand, face the future. Alright, fuck yeah. Very cool shit. You can hear me and Keats talk about audiomancy and sound magic in episode 22 of this show, and hear my guest appearance on Prag Magic as well to talk about my work. I do want to mention that we are going to be talking more about cut-ups on the show coming up here soon. Dr. Vanessa Sinclair has been kind enough to agree to come and speak to me about some of her work along these lines, and I'm looking forward to that. Some more programming notes here. I also recently spoke with Professor Patricia McCormick about querying chaos magic, as well as her book, The A-Human Manifesto. It was a great conversation that I'm very stoked to share. The next episode is going to be about the Mycocultus Project, which is a collaborative thing that participants in the Green Mushroom Project have put together to share, and will feature a conversation that I had with Dave Ardrey of the AOD, which is the Ancient Order of Druids. He is, of course, also one of the hosts of the Unearthing Paranormalcy podcast. He was the main force behind putting Myco-Cultist together, which is a sort of mushroom-themed reskin of some classic tech that you might encounter in a variety of different places. But this one manages to take all of the gender-y stuff, and perhaps, it could be argued the gender essentialism stuff that used to be there out of the equation. There's also going to be some other very fun things included in that episode as well. The 23 Bibliomancy experiment continues. Speaking of the Green Mushroom Project, the last session was positively hair-raising, very spooky, and very cool. Grab a book and some dice and join us on the 23rd as we continue to discover our scripture. The 6 Ways by Aidan Wachter study group is meeting Saturday afternoons to talk praxis and practice. Big thanks to Laura for organizing that and for being such an awesome facilitator. Fuck yeah. Sexual Magic Discussion Group has been in the process of building out some stuff that we're stoked to experiment with. The idea of using sexual magic as a means of personal development is something that I've found a lot of power and utility and enjoyment in too. You can read about that in the essays I've written about my occult audio erotica, so I'm not going to go into it here, but it's something that I feel passionately about, and it's cool to see others taking an interest in doing that type of work as well, so fuck yeah. Okay, I think that's most of the updates about what we've got going on. Check out our Discord server for the next 24 Cinema Score, where we watch old campy horror movies and make fun of them, and a more complete list of all of the events that we have in store. As always, much love and much love to everybody participating in the project, regardless of what that looks like for you and your practice. I'll leave you with one of my tracks from Fuck Around and Find Out Part 2 in the Green Mushroom Project and We the Hollow digital mixtape, but first, allow me to remind you to resist. Resist by maintaining sovereignty of the self. Resist by maintaining love of the self. Resist by maintaining fierce loyalty to love and pleasure. Resist with acts of radical kindness. Focus on the path to better times. Fuck yeah. And fuck yar. Thank you so much to Rocket for joining me today. Thanks to everyone who submitted work to Fuck Around and Find Out Part 2, The Green Mushroom Project and We the Hollow digital mixtape. And most of all, thanks to you for listening. Much love. This is Lux Estrada, reminding you to stay strong and stay fucking curious. Do you hear it? I hear it. It sounds like the void cat cometh. Cheers.
Meow, wham, yeah, rah, oh, yeah, meow, wham, yeah, rah, oh, yeah, meow, wham, yeah, rah, oh, meow, wham, yeah, rah, oh, meow, wham, yeah, rah, oh, meow, wham, yeah, rah, oh,
Man getting bit by an alligator and he screams. Man getting bit by an alligator and he screams. Man getting bit by an alligator and he screams.
Lux Occult is part of the Green Mushroom Podcast Network.
What scares you?
Ghosts,
aliens,
Monsters?
the occult.
conspiracies.
Some of you like to be scared, and unearthing paranormalcy is for you.
Some of you try everything you can to avoid it. Unearthing paranormalcy is for you.
We take the topics that scare some, and we dig in to find the source, then present the history to make the paranormal a little more normal.
We also throw in a bit of comedy to shed a light on some of the darkness in the world.
So whether you're scared of bumps in the night, what's inside your own mind, or strange lights in the sky, we cover it all.
We dig in and present all that we find and try to come up with some logical
And not so logical.
reasons for the high strangeness happenings.
Sometimes we are scared of the things we don't understand, and the more we understand, the less we fear.
So find us, Unearthing Paranormalcy, on your favorite podcast app. And join us on Facebook, Instagram, and Discord at UMP Normalcy. And until next time,
Keep digging.
Welcome to XV Planet. Greetings, friends, fiends, and lovers of strange and wondrous things. My name is Flood, and I am the host of XV Planets, a bi-weekly podcast of the odd and unusual. The core of XV Planets is a documentary-style exploration into paranormal investigations that I and my ever-evolving group of magical misfits conduct. We take a look at the history, the mystery, then go see it for ourselves, and then we bring that experience, and on occasion, that evidence, to your ears. Alongside the investigations, you'll find a treasure trove of other content, like interviews with authors, art historians, mediums, UFO researchers, cryptid hunters, fellow paranormal investigators, as well as deep dives into the arts, exploring topics like the Killing Joke frontman Jazz Coleman's magical practices and how that propelled the band forward, and whether or not David Lynch was really conducting occult rituals through Twin Peaks: The Return. So follow XV Planets today and get caught up on the journey, because I can promise you, it only gets stranger from here. I'll see you on the fifth plane.
Are you heartbroken? Having trouble letting go of that special someone? Here at Illumin Industries, we understand the complex web of strife and heartache that is mortal existence. That's why we created Forever Friend, a revolutionary advancement in companionship science. Thanks to new changes in the law, it is now possible to transfer someone's digital imprint to one of our specially designed furry friends. Imagine cuddling up at night with a cat or dog that combines the fluffy softness of a Persian and the personality point markers of your ex-fiancé, or the loyalty of a golden retriever with the skill for trivia of your dead husband. Forever Friends are carefully engineered to be hypoallergenic, hyper-enhanced, and gluten-free, allowing for hours of authentic-feeling conversation. Conversation mode can be switched off through the Forever Friend app for those times when you'd prefer to be alone with your thoughts. Choose from over 20 breeds of dogs and cats with a variety of color options, with bird options coming soon. The possibilities are endless. Forever Friends, softer than the real thing. Illumin, making it work for you. See Cyber Catalog for details and information about the Forever Friend privacy policy. Illumin Industries and its affiliates reserve the right to change these policies at any time without notice. All conversations with Forever Friends may be recorded for quality control and optimization purposes. Quality of Forever Friends personality emulation is dependent on data richness of digital imprint, not responsible for actions of Forever Friends.